Hello and welcome. So in this demo, we are going to look at how to take an organic form made with the builder and volume mesher, make the mesh somewhat sane using Remesh, and specifically the Zremesher that's available in R26. And then we are going to look at how to UV unwrap an organic form. Okay, so let's get started. So to start with, we have this base model that I made out of just some simple things. Obviously, this is a really dumb, kind of creepy, odd-looking snake with no eyes, but you know what? It does the job. And so I left it completely built just so that those of you that may have some familiarity with the volume builder or volume mesher or don't at all can kind of see how this thing is made. So if I uncheck the volume builder and volume mesher, right, you'll see that I just have a collection of objects of different mesh densities that I am using to make this thing, right? So there's a cone, there's a little sphere here, a bigger sphere here, a little spline sweep that I did here to kind of cut into the face just a little bit. These eyes are meant to cut out, and then this is just a sweep along a circle or along a spline with a circle spline. And you'll note that I made the circle editable. If I turn this off and I have the circle selected, even though it's kind of inside the body here, you can see that I squished it a little bit, so it's a little bit more snake-like in terms of the shape. Again, I made this very, very quickly with the intention of it just being kind of a cartoonish thing that we could use. So if I turn everything back on, right, I've got this insane mesh. Now, this would be, like, I'm really happy with the snake. I'd like to be able to paint it or texture it or maybe even eventually apply like a real like snakeskin texture to it. However, in its current state, that is definitely going to be a mess, right? Trying to UV unwrap this, even Cinema might complain, and this isn't even all that many polygons. It might take forever for it to do the unwrapping, even if it was to do it automatically. So what we're going to do is we are going to use the remesher. So if I come in here, oops, I always grab the wrong one. If I come up to the subdivision surface object here, or if you have the old layout, right, it's going to be at the top, but it should be this same icon. And I come down and go to remesh, and I make the volume builder a child of the remesher. It'll take a hot second. And then it's going to give us, something that looks like this. Now this is already better, but that mesh is also still pretty dense, and there's a lot of density there that I don't necessarily need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my remesh in my hierarchy. Make sure Zremesher is the one that is selected. If you don't have this option, you're probably using revision 25 or below. And Zremesher is a new feature in revision 26 that's super awesome. So what I'm going to do instead of doing mesh density here is I'm going to do polygon count. And polygon count aims for this value that you put in here, 2000. However, if there are areas of high detail, like say where the eye sockets are and there's that bend that's pretty significant, it's going to add more polygons around those points. And so usually you will end up with a slightly higher number of polygons on your model in the end. And this is a pretty gentle curve, so we don't have a whole lot of extra detail there. You'll notice there's more polygons on the muzzle of the snake. I think that's what you would call the end of a snake's mouth. And then the tail should be just a little bit more detailed as well, right? Because there's a pretty hard curve there at the end. All right, so I've got this set up, but now I want you to note one other thing, right? The mesh up top here is not very centered. And you can see like these polygons are going to be kind of annoying to work with. It'd be better if this was a symmetrical face. Now, in the past, we were able to use one of these symmetry objects to create symmetry, and it looks like, in this case, X worked really, really well. I don't know why it didn't work so well the other time, but this is pretty great. So doing symmetry in the X on this model works really well. Another way, if you are having issues where that symmetry isn't working. And you'll notice if you do symmetry in the Y, it's actually, right, it makes the model symmetrical, which now this looks more like a flatworm or something instead of a thing. And you can see what X does, or what Z does. There's some kind of cool things that can happen with the symmetry, depending on where your model is located, where this is the center point here, and that's why it's doing it symmetrically like that. But you can create some really interesting forms that way. Obviously we don't, and this is in X and Y, or sorry, Z and Y. So this is just Z, and if I did Z and X, it would probably actually give me just two heads. Right, so you have to choose one of these. Now sometimes, no matter what you do, your model, and that's the issue I hadn't flipped over, right? So this is a two-headed snake. That's awesome. But symmetry is not working, right? X works well because it actually does align the polygons where I want them on the face. However, it's doing it all over the place. So what I need to do to fix this is I need to use something called a flow spline. And a flow spline is just a spline that we use to influence how the polygons are laid out on the mesh. And the only spot that I'm really concerned about is the head and the face. The rest of the body, it's not so much of an issue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a spline, and first I'm going to go into top view. And what I want to do is I want to basically figure out where my center line here is on his face, or her face, or their face. And I want to and I'm just going to create a straight spline that goes through this. You can create curved splines. They can be closed. They can be open. It can do all sorts of interesting things to the surface of the object. But we're going to use a straight line for this one because through my testing, that seems to work best. So I'm going to go to the spline pen. I'm going to go to points mode. And I'm going to go ahead and deselect all of that and drop a point here, come down through the nose, and drop a point here. Now I'm going to hit escape. I'm actually going to select this first point and click and drag and hold shift so it stays, well, maybe not hold shift, control. Okay, well, never mind. I'm just going to go ahead and pull this back a little bit further, kind of so it's, past the end of the head. Hit escape again so it's there. And then I'm going to pop back to perspective view. Now, right now, this spline is right halfway through the head of this object. I'm going to go ahead and make it a flow spline, and then we will see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and select remesh. I'm going to grab my spline. I'm going to drag it down into flow spline. It's going to think about this for a second. And once it's thought about it for a little bit, you'll see it hasn't made a huge difference. If you look at the bottom, there's some weird distortion happening there. So what we need to do is we need to move this up closer, and I'm going to go to object mode here, or model mode, use the move tool. I'm going to start by dragging this flow spline up to the top of the head, more or less. And once that's done, you'll notice that now, right, that flow is much better than it was previously, but it looks like I might actually, the head's not quite right aligned perfectly. It might be nice if I could tweak this and push it over a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and use my rotation tool, and I'm going to rotate the spline just a touch that way, and let's see what we get. That's a little bit better than it was before. It's much more centered. Now, there's a little bit of distortion here on the muzzle, but it's not, enough to worry about too much. And granted, this model isn't even necessarily perfectly symmetrical either. The other thing we can try is actually rotating it down like this, so it's a little bit more closely aligned with the entire front surface. And you'll see that in this case, that is not doing positive things. So we're going to go ahead and undo that. Oftentimes these flow splines will be snapped to the surface of the object, but in this case I found that just having it kind of floating above seems to be the best bet. And I might pull it this direction just a hair and see if we get like a slightly better thing, right? So it's not, it's not necessarily perfect. I could probably put another flow spline down here below the chin as well, and we might as well try that. I'm just going to hold down Control while I click and drag the spline and bring it down here below the chin, and nothing has changed, right? Because this is not a flow spline yet, so I need to select my remesh. I'm going to drop it in here, and honestly, I've still been experimenting with these. I don't know if this is going to make this a total snaggle thing, but no, it looks like it cleaned it up a little bit. There is one odd polygon down here, and so that might indicate that this might not be my best bet. If I go ahead and turn this off, let's see what happens. Okay, yeah, it's a lot better without that flow spline turned on. So, so I'm going to go ahead and just leave the one up top, right? And that allows me to make sure that at least on the head these are even, and then everything flows the way it should the rest of the length down the body. Okay, so I've got this all set. I'm happy with this. I'm going to save it. And then what I can do is what I want to do is make this just a uniform polygon mesh at this point, right? I don't need, let's say I'm done modeling it. I don't need to do too much more. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on the remesher, and I'm going to go down to, I think I just say current state to object would probably work. Yes, and so now I've got this remesh polygon. I'm going to just go ahead and paintbrush all of this away. Oh, and let's see here. Let's just hide the whole object. All right, what's nice is I still have that one left, so if I make any terrible mistakes, I've got the ability to do something. So I'm going to go ahead and save this again. And now I've got my polygon mesh, and we can start to unwrap it. So to start that process, we need to figure out where do we want to cut this. Now, if I was using an image of a snake skin to do most of this mesh, I would want to see like where that image is cut. And oftentimes, right, when people skin a snake, they will cut it straight down the center of the belly. Now, there's two ways we could think about doing this, especially if we're going to be hand painting this or working with textures that we might want a little bit more freedom with. So we could either do a single cut down the center, or we could select a strip, right? Because snakes' bellies have different scales on them than the rest of the body. And so we could figure out where that seam was and find the nearest polygon and actually make it so we have a little bit more, so it's a little bit easier to lay out and work with those bottom scales. Now, if the snake is we're never going to see the belly of the snake in our scene, that probably doesn't really matter. So in this case, right, what we're going to do is we're going to want to make a cut to cut the head off. And then we're going to need to split the head. And so we can peel that skin up and away. And then we will need to, make a cut down the length of the snake as well. So let's go ahead and create the line where we're going to cut the snake's head off. And I'm going to suggest that we cut it, here where the head kind of basically goes down and starts and intersects with the body. So I should be able to go to Edges mode, and I should be able to hit U to go to the selection tools, and then L to create loop selection. And I can come over here. I can create this line cut here. Now we need to go down the body of the snake. Now you can see if I try and do a loop cut here, things get interesting. I'm going to go ahead and, let's see here, hold down Shift. I'm going to have both of those cuts. And you can see, my loop is kind of strange. It's not really going where I want it to go up at the top, but that's fine. I don't need it there. I just need that bottom edge. So I can come in here and I can use my live selection tool. I can hold down Control, zoom in a little bit, and just get rid of all of this selection. There may be another tool that would be more efficient to do this, but in my case, I don't want to deal with that while I'm doing this tutorial, so I'm just going to go ahead and clean that up. And then obviously we don't need any of the selection area that's in the head right now. That's not going to be useful to us, except perhaps that line along the bottom of the jaw. So we're going to leave that, but I'm going to hold down Control and get rid of everything along the side of the face here. Okay. So, right, so this comes up, you know, I think it's pretty easy to imagine what the body looks like unwrapped, right? You just peel that off, make it flat, lay it flat. The head right now is a little bit problematic, right? There's going to be some weirdness there. And so we need to figure out where we're going to make the final cuts to help this lay flat more effectively. And you know, usually on human heads, right, we would put a line, we would try and do like a little cut here. This might be something where we just do a lot more experimentation until we get a result that we're happy with. One thing I would suggest is we could potentially put cuts around, loop cuts around the eye sockets, because those are going to be totally hidden. So once we're past the point where, you know, the eye would sit in this, we can do that. So let's go ahead and hit UL. And let's see if we can find a cut that we can actually make. And the only reason I suggest this is it should stop the distortion some, but the way that it's trying to loop through there is nightmarish and spirally. So that might be something where we use the path selection tool. So we say U, and then path selection is the M key. And so I'd hold down Shift and say, really, I want this probably here. And I just want to try and roll around this and see if it will actually let me do that without freaking out. Okay, that's about as far as I can get. So now I'm going to hold the Shift. I'm going to go ahead and try to do this a little bit more. And again, some Shift. Oh, and this is where the problem lays in here. Interesting. Well, maybe we don't select this. I don't know why it decided to spiral that whole thing. But that's all right. Okay, so we've got this set the way it is, and we're going to leave it with just this one edge selected for the time being, but we will probably be making some adjustments to this cut, depending on how deformed this head is when we do this. So let's go ahead and go to our UV edit mode. And you can see that's beautiful right now. Those UVs are going to work really well for us as they currently stand. So we're going to use some of the same steps that we used to start with. We're going to rotate this view. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to delete the existing UV tag, because that is ugly. So let's go ahead and select this UV tag and delete it. And now that we've got this object set, we still have our selection. It would be a good moment to go to select at the top of the screen and go down and say store selection. So we have those edges. So if we do something and make a mistake, we have those edges selected. It's also a good point to save it before we do the UV unwrap. And so now what we need to do, there's a couple steps. Let's go ahead and say set UV from projection, but let's click on the gear, and we're going to change this from flat to frontal. We're going to hit OK. And so we should have something that looks similar to our snake there. And then let's go ahead and we can say UV unwrap. I don't think we need to do any adjustments there. We're just going to hit OK. All right, so now we've got our snake and it is unwrapped. Now, you can see this is clearly the head, and this is clearly the body of the snake. So now what we can do is we can use a tool that's going to show us how distorted this is. So if we go down, if we select view and we go down to distortion, we will get a view here, and I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit bigger and zoom in. Right, so this view shows us where things are distorted. Now, the blue and red, basically white means that it's the least distortion, blue means it's distorted in one particular way, red means it's distorted in the other direction. And the question is, do these little islands of distortion matter, and how much do they matter? And you can kind of see where, right, this is stretched because this edge is a little bit further out, and this is squished because the edge is a little further in. So we could go ahead and manipulate these points a little bit. I could go to polygon mode and double click, use my live selection tool, select these polygons. And if I move this with a magnet, you can kind of see that I can adjust some of that distortion a little bit. And this is something where it really depends when you start to get your textures on there. Does it matter, or is it fine? Any distortion here at the end of the tail, if we wanted to, we could cut further in, but I don't. But because this is more distorted than anything else. But I don't think we're going to need to do that in order to, have a successful model. And up here, that distortion is really, really pretty light. So we could make adjustments there, but we don't have to. Now on the other thing we can do is if we go to textures and we go to UV map, we can have that be our texture. Then we can come down here to the snake in our other view, and we can actually take a look and see how distorted this map is. Now, on the, I don't know why it's so pale right now. Oh, it's probably because the distortion is on too. So if I go to view and turn distortion off, there we go. It's a little bit easier to see. Right, you can see that, right, the scale is kind of weird on the head. And the UVs are stretched and distorted, especially on that side of the face, and then they're going to be more compressed on that side. Whereas if we look at the snake's body, they're really pretty even. I'm honestly really happy with that. There's like a little bit of offset there, but that's just the way that's going to be. But otherwise, that's pretty happy. Now the head, again, right, there's a lot of distortion happening there. So this is another like tool to give us a visual cue onto like, oh yeah, there's some areas that are distorted, and we need to work on those. Now, one of the differences between a hard surface or a rectilinear object and a organic form is there's always going to be some distortion in the organic form. The question is, where do you want it? Where don't you want it? And how can you make that less pronounced? So let's go back to our UV view here, and we're going to do an empty canvas. And one of the things we can do to reduce some of this, if we go back to our view and turn distortion on, is we can cut a little bit further in to the chin here. So we could have a couple more polygons cut there, right? These edge polygons are really, distorted. I'm not super concerned about the distortion within the eye sockets, right? Because again, they're going to be hidden. We don't, and if we get distortion there and it means that there's less distortion elsewhere, then we're pretty happy. So let's go ahead and cut into the head a little bit more. So I'm going to go to edges mode, and I am going to, first, before I do anything, I'm going to come down to polygons mode. I'm going to double click with my live selection tool. So I have this island selected. Then I'm going to go to edges mode, and I'm going to come down here, and I'm just going to hold down shift because I want those other edges to remain. And actually I should probably say UM for the path selection tool. Hold down shift, and I'm just going to go up a little bit further with this. I'm afraid I'm going a little too far, but we will see how that works. Now, something else I can do to relieve some of this pressure is I could do a cut in the center of the head, but we're going to start here. And so this time I'm going to say with this UV unwrap, or should we let's do relax UV, cut selected edges. Let's go ahead and hit apply, right? So that already, right, reduced the distortion pretty significantly around the whole head. There's these areas here where it's like most distorted, right, which are going to be on the underside of the head of the snake. So we can go ahead and rotate this around, and if you look at that, you'll see this is where the most distortion is occurring. And so part of that is probably due to the way that the neck is is set here. So I could go ahead and hold down Shift and maybe make a cut there and maybe make a cut here. And then I can do this, I can go ahead and apply this relax again. Let's go ahead and make this view bigger so we can see what's happening. So I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. And then I'm going to go ahead and undo that. And see, I just want to see if I've made things worse or better. It's kind of better, right? These polygons are still pretty distorted, but it looks like there's less distortion along the center edge there. So, you know, I'm just going through and trying cuts in different places. Now remember, anytime there's a cut, there's going to be a little gap, and I'm going to need to try and like make sure that the texture seems similar on both sides. But if I come over here, hold down Shift and maybe go up 2 and go in about 3 again and go up 2 and apply this, right? That again made some of these things better, but these polygons are still super distorted. I could potentially select these islands and see if I can shrink them and if that helps with the distortion. So let's go ahead and use our live selection tool and go to polygon mode. Oops, that's model mode. And I'm just going to go ahead and select all of those. And let's see if I relax this. And I'm going to try the other formula. Oh, nope. It's cutting, sorry, it's cutting it along the thing. If I say pin to neighbors, let's just hit apply. Okay, so did you see that change? I pinned to neighbors, I used A, B, F, and hit apply. And now if I was to deselect that, these are significantly less distorted. So I can go ahead and probably do the same thing over here. And you'll notice that I accidentally made this cut not necessarily in a uniform place. Oops. But you know, you should do a better job when you're working on your models. So now I've got this selected. I'm going to have the pin to neighbor still check marked and cut selected edges. I hit apply, and that should reduce that intensity some. Now I could make one additional cut if I wanted to over here, which, you know, for the sake of all things, maybe I should go ahead and do that. So that I have, and really I should have, this is where the cut should have been initially, so I have to go back to edges, hold down Shift, right? I want to keep my other edges selected. I'm just going to go in 2, and I'm going to go ahead and, I want to apply this, but I want to come back, hit the space bar, go to, what's it called, mode, double click. And then now that I've got all of that selected and I'm in edges mode, I can go ahead and hit apply. And again, and because I'm using this other formula too, it's reduced all of that tension that was on that object. Okay, so this is the end of this tutorial. You could realign this polygon island some so it's more straight. You could, if you wanted more texture space for the tail, for the body, you could put that at a diagonal and make it a little bit larger and put the head down here in the corner. If you go to UV packing and say geometric and hit apply, you know, it does a job. You know, it just flip things around a little bit. It's not, you know, nothing crazy. But if you want to have more control over that, you can select each of these islands independently and adjust them the way you'd like to.